All right, let's dive right into today's explainer. We're unpacking something that literally touches every single aspect of our society, but somehow it usually stays completely hidden in plain sight. We're going to look at the sheer, staggering scale of trauma, and more importantly, how our brains meticulously record every single experience we ever have. So this isn't just a history lesson, it's about how our past is actively hardwiring our present biology. Let's decode the trauma pandemic. To really wrap our heads around the massive scope of this crisis, we have to look at the numbers. Just consider this one stat for a second. 1 in 5 Americans has been a victim of childhood sexual abuse. It is a sobering, incredibly heavy reality, and it honestly just represents one single facet of what experts are now calling a full-blown trauma pandemic. And when you zoom out, the data gets even wilder. 1 in 3 couples experiences physical violence. Over a quarter of the population grows up with alcoholic relatives. And maybe the most eye-opening part, at least half of the entire population has adverse childhood experiences, or what we call ACEs. When you realize that trauma touches at least half of us, it becomes crystal clear that we aren't just talking about isolated incidents. We are dealing with a society-wide pandemic, one that creates intergenerational impacts that echo through families for decades. Okay, Section 1, Your Personal Ledger, How the Brain Records Experience. The source we're looking at introduces this really fascinating concept to explain all of this: the personal ledger. Think of your developing brain as a super meticulous, never-sleeping accountant. Every single interaction you have, the people you meet, places you go, things you feel, gets deposited right into this personal ledger. Your brain then uses this massive historical account to categorize experiences and form associations. It literally becomes the unique codebook you use to interpret the entire world around you. Which brings us to the core thesis of our whole topic today, summed up perfectly in this famous phrase: the body, mind, and brain keep a score. That hits the nail on the head, right? Trauma isn't just some bad memory floating around in your thoughts. Our bodies physically hold on to these imprints. This accumulation on your ledger actually alters your physiological baseline, completely shifting how you respond to everyday, normal life. Moving on to Section 2, the stress response, or what happens when the ledger overdraws. So picture a regulated state. That means your autonomic nervous system is beautifully balanced. Your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems are working together, letting you manage impulses, bounce back from frustrations, and just stay resilient. But when that ledger overdraws, you hit a dysregulated state. The whole system becomes imbalanced and hypersensitive. It's like the alarm system is constantly tripping, throwing a person into extreme responses: fight, flight, freeze, or even a total shutdown, which we know as dissociation. Section 3, the sequence of engagement, and why reasoning completely fails. To really get this, you have to know that your brain processes information sequentially, from the bottom up. Incoming sensory stuff hits the brainstem and diencephalon first. That's pure survival and arousal. Then it moves up to the limbic system, our emotional and memory center. Only after passing through those filters does it finally hit the highly evolved cortex, the place where rational thought, language, and creativity live. So when a traumatized brain gets triggered, that stress hits the survival and emotional centers and just gets stuck there. It completely bypasses the rational cortex. The thinking brain is literally taken offline. Because of this bottom-up biological hierarchy, you simply cannot start with logic. You can't just talk someone out of a trauma response. So the absolute crucial sequence to remember is this: regulate, relate, reason. First, we have to regulate the physical body and calm the survival brain. Next, we have to relate, build a connection to soothe the emotional brain. Only after those 2 steps are totally locked in can we ever hope to engage the cortex and actually reason with someone. Section 4, paths to recovery. Reconciling the ledger. Okay, so if the brain works from the bottom up, healing has to start from the bottom up too. We have to literally apply the brakes to that hyperactive sympathetic nervous system. We do this with practices that rebuild a baseline of safety. This can look like monitoring heart rate variability, using deep, deliberate breath control, or getting into rhythmic activities. Think yoga, martial arts, or even drumming. Body-based therapies and sensory integration, like therapeutic massage or somatic experiencing, are absolute game changers here because they bypass the thinking brain entirely and communicate safety straight to the body. Now, once the body is safely regulated, the cortex finally comes back online. And that's when top-down therapies become incredibly powerful. Talk therapy is great for weaving fragmented traumatic memories safely into the past. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, helps restructure negative thought patterns. Then you have things like EMDR, which uses eye movements to unblock stuck trauma, and neurofeedback, which actually trains the brain to self-regulate using real-time data. There's also DBT for accessing what they call the wise mind to regulate really intense emotions. The whole goal of the shebang is to process the trauma without completely overwhelming the nervous system. Now, this part is absolutely wild. Traditional psychiatric meds often just dampen symptoms for a bit without actually curing the underlying issue. But experimental trials using psychoactive substances, specifically MDMA paired with psychotherapy, have shown staggering results. In one U.S. trial, an incredible 83% of patients were considered completely cured of their trauma. 83%. Why? Because the substance essentially allowed them to stay in their window of tolerance. They could finally look at and process their trauma safely without their bodily alarms going off and shutting down the thinking brain. But look, we can't just rely on therapies and clinical science. Profound healing ultimately requires human connection. Having a robust support network is, without a doubt, the single most powerful safeguard we have against this trauma pandemic. Strong relationships provide essential physical and emotional safety. They protect us from the toxic shame and isolation that trauma thrives on. By just providing human contact and emotional attunement, our networks foster the exact resilience we need to confront the past and rewrite our stories. Trauma isn't an individual failing. It is deeply embedded in our shared human history. But here's the hopeful part. While we can't change the past, our actions today literally shape the epigenetics and well-being of the generations to come. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question. How can you apply regulate, relate, reason in your own life? Whether it's with a coworker, a loved one, or even yourself, just take a second to consider the incredible power you hold to cultivate resilience, offer a little grace, and help rewrite the ledger of our shared future.